Have you ever spent years learning English and still felt completely frozen when it was finally time to speak? Have you ever understood videos, understood teachers, understood subtitles? But the moment someone asked you a simple question, your mind suddenly went blank. Have you ever felt embarrassed because deep inside you knew you were studying hard, but somehow your English still did not feel natural? And maybe the most painful part is watching other people speak confidently, while you quietly wonder why nothing seems to work for you. No matter how much grammar or vocabulary you study, if that feeling sounds familiar, then listen carefully, because this may completely change the way you learn English forever. The problem is not that you are lazy, untalented, or bad at languages. The real problem is that nobody showed you how to train English like a real daily skill, because fluency is not built through random studying. Fluency is built through consistent brain training, and today you are about to discover a simple 60-minute daily formula that combines listening, shadowing, vocabulary, speaking, and writing in the exact proportions that train your brain to understand faster, react quicker, remember longer, and speak more naturally over time. And if you follow this consistently for 3 to 6 months, your English reflexes may improve more than they did in years of traditional study, because this system was designed not to make you memorize English, but to make your brain adapt to English naturally every single day. And if you feel exhausted after trying to learn English for years, without becoming truly confident, I want you to understand something important right now. This is not only your struggle. Millions of learners feel exactly the same way every single day. They were taught English through a system that trained memory more than communication. They were told to focus on grammar first, perfection first, correctness first. So they spent years collecting information, but never truly training the brain to react naturally in real conversations. And slowly, English became something stressful instead of something alive. Maybe you remember opening your mouth to speak and suddenly forgetting simple words you already knew. Maybe you remember hearing English clearly but still freezing because your brain needed too much time to translate everything. And over time, that feeling creates something painful, self-doubt, because you start wondering if maybe you are simply not good enough to become fluent. But the truth is much more hopeful than that, because the problem was never your intelligence. The problem was the structure of your learning system. Your brain was not being trained consistently in the areas that actually create fluency. Nobody showed you that listening should become your biggest daily activity, because language first enters through the ears before it comes out naturally through speech. Nobody explained why shadowing trains pronunciation and speaking reflexes faster than silent study. Nobody taught you how short daily vocabulary review through active recall helps the brain remember naturally over time. Nobody encouraged you to speak every single day, even imperfectly, and almost nobody explained why writing a few sentences daily helps organize thoughts directly in English instead of translate from another language constantly. And this is exactly why the 60-minute formula works so differently, because every part of the system trains a specific language skill in the exact proportion your brain actually needs. 20 minutes of listening trains familiarity and comprehension. 15 minutes of shadowing trains speaking rhythm and pronunciation. 10 minutes of vocabulary strengthens memory. 10 minutes of speaking builds communication confidence. And 5 minutes of writing reinforce thinking in English naturally. And when you repeat this process daily for 3 to 6 months, your brain slowly stops treating English like a school subject and begins adapting to it like a real language. Used in everyday life, and that is the moment many learners finally realize something powerful. Fluency was never about studying harder. It was about training smarter and more consistently every single day. I still remember the moment I realized I was studying English constantly, but not truly training myself to use it naturally. Because from the outside, it looked like I was working hard. I spent hours learning grammar, memorizing vocabulary, watching educational lessons, and trying to improve every possible weakness. But when real conversations happened, something inside me still froze, and that feeling was incredibly frustrating because I knew I understood more English than I could actually speak. And one day that frustration became impossible to ignore. Someone asked me a very simple question in English. And even though I understood every single word, my brain suddenly became slow and empty. I started translating in my head, checking grammar mentally, searching for vocabulary, and by the time I finally formed a sentence, the conversation had already moved on. And afterward, I remember feeling embarrassed and tired because I realized something painful. I had spent years learning English, but almost no time actually training my speaking reflexes naturally. And for a long time, I blamed myself. I thought maybe my memory was weak. Maybe I was not talented enough. Maybe fluency was only for people with special ability. But everything began changing the moment I stopped asking, how can I study more? And started asking, how can I train my brain daily? And slowly I discovered something that transformed everything for me, a simple 60-minute daily structure that trained every important language system together in balance, not perfectly, not academically, but practically and consistently. So every morning, I began with 20 minutes of listening, podcasts, YouTube videos, interviews, Netflix scenes, not because I understood every word, but because daily listening slowly made English feel familiar instead of foreign. Then I added 15 minutes of shadowing, where I repeated native speakers out loud exactly as they spoke, copying rhythm, pronunciation, speed, emotion. And at first, it felt awkward. But after a few weeks, something incredible happened. My mouth started reacting faster, without overthinking every sound. Then I spent 10 minutes reviewing vocabulary through active recall using tools like Anki or Quizlet, not memorizing huge lists, but repeatedly revisiting useful real-world phrases until they stayed naturally in my memory. After that, I spent 10 minutes speaking out loud even when nobody was around, describing my day, reacting to videos, recording myself speaking imperfect English, because I finally understood that speaking confidence only grows through actual speaking, not preparation alone. And finally, I ended with 5 minutes of writing short journal entries in simple English about my thoughts, my goals, or my daily experiences, because writing helped organize English directly inside my brain without translating constantly from my native language. And after repeating this 60-minute system daily, something incredible slowly started happening. My listening became calmer, my reactions became quicker, common phrases started appearing automatically in my mind, and for the first time, English stopped feeling like a difficult subject I was trying to survive and started feeling like a real communication skill, becoming part of my everyday life. And that experience completely changed the way I understood fluency forever, because I realized the goal was never perfection. The goal was adaptation. And adaptation only happens when the brain experiences English consistently through listening, imitation, memory, speaking, and reflection every single day over time. So here is the big idea that completely changes the way you should think about learning English. Fluency is not created by studying one skill endlessly. Fluency is created when multiple language systems are trained to get together consistently in the correct proportions every single day. And that is exactly why this 60-minute formula works so powerfully, because every part of the schedule trains a different function inside your brain while supporting all the others at the same time. And the reason the formula begins with 20 minutes of listening is because listening is the foundation of natural language acquisition. Before you can speak naturally, your brain must first become emotionally familiar with the sounds, rhythm, speed, pronunciation, and patterns of real English. And this is why constant listening exposure through YouTube, podcasts, Netflix, interviews, or conversations slowly changes the brain beneath the surface, because repeated listening trains recognition automatically over time until English starts sounding less foreign and more predictable. Then the next 15 minutes are dedicated to shadowing, because listening alone is not enough. Your mouth and speaking reflexes also need training, and shadowing forces your brain to connect listening and speaking together in real time by repeating native speech immediately, which improves pronunciation, speaking rhythm, confidence, and reaction speed far faster than silent study ever could. And then comes 10 minutes of vocabulary training through active recall and spaced repetition using tools like Anki or Quizlet, because the brain remembers information best when it repeatedly retrieves useful phrases over time instead of huge lists. Instead of memorizing huge lists once and forgetting them days later. And the reason this section is only 10 minutes is because vocabulary grows most effectively through consistency and repetition, not long, exhausting study sessions. Then another 10 minutes are dedicated to speaking, because speaking is not the result of fluency. Speaking is part of the process that creates fluency itself. And when you speak daily, even with mistakes, your brain slowly stops fearing communication and begins adapting to real-time language production naturally. And finally, the last 5 minutes are used for writing because short daily writing sessions help organize thoughts directly in English while reinforcing vocabulary, sentence patterns, and emotional connection to the language. And although writing only takes 5 minutes, its psychological effect is powerful because it trains your brain to express personal thoughts using English. Instead of only consuming information passively, and what makes this entire formula so effective is not the difficulty of any single activity. It is the balance and consistency between all of them together. Listening builds familiarity. Shadowing builds speaking reflexes. Vocabulary strengthens memory. Speaking builds communication confidence. And writing reinforces internal language organization. And when these systems are repeated daily for 3 to 6 months, something incredible begins happening automatically. Your listening becomes calmer, your vocabulary appears faster, your pronunciation becomes smoother, and your reactions become more natural because the brain is finally being trained through repetition, exposure, communication, and emotional familiarity instead of isolated academic study alone. And this is why the real secret of fluency is not intensity. The real secret is consistent, balanced of exposure, repeated daily until English slowly becomes part of your normal life instead of something separate from it. Now let's make this extremely practical because this is the moment where many learners suddenly realize why this system feels so much more natural than traditional studying. Imagine two different people trying to improve their English for the next 6 months. The first person studies randomly whenever they feel motivated, sometimes grammar, sometimes vocabulary lists, sometimes long lessons that feel mentally exhausting. But there is no structure, no balance, and no daily speaking practice. While the second person follows the 60-minute formula consistently every day, even if the sessions are not perfect. And now let's look at what that actually looks like in real life. Every morning, the second learner begins with 20 minutes of listening while eating breakfast or getting ready for the day, maybe a YouTube interview, maybe a Netflix scene, maybe a podcast about daily life. And at first, they only understand part of it, but because they repeat this daily, something important begins happening. The brain slowly becomes familiar with natural English sounds, connected speech, common expressions, and emotional tone. And after a few weeks, listening no longer feels like decoding noise. It begins feeling recognizable and emotionally comfortable. Then, immediately after listening, they spend 15 minutes shadowing, repeating short phrases exactly as native speakers say them, like, I'm trying to improve every day, or that actually makes a lot of sense. And during the first week, they may sound awkward and slow, but after repeating daily, their mouth starts moving more naturally because shadowing trains pronunciation and speaking reflexes directly through imitation instead of overthinking grammar constantly. Then they spend 10 minutes reviewing vocabulary inside Anki or Quizlet, not memorizing giant dictionaries, but revisiting useful real-life phrases repeatedly over time. And because active recall forces the brain to retrieve information instead of passively rereading it, those phrases begin staying in long-term memory naturally. Then comes 10 minutes of speaking, where the learner talks out loud even alone, maybe describing their plans for the day, reacting to a video, answering imaginary questions, or recording a short voice memo in English. And at first, they make mistakes constantly. But after several weeks, something incredible begins happening. The fear of speaking slowly decreases because the brain becomes emotionally familiar with producing English daily instead of avoiding it. And finally, they end with 5 minutes of writing a small journal entry. Like, today I felt more confident speaking English, or I learned 3 useful expressions today. And although the writing is simple, it helps organize thoughts directly in English without translating every sentence mentally. And now compare this learner to the first learner after 3 months. The first learner may still know many grammar rules intellectually, but freezes during conversation because the brain never trained communication reflexes consistently, while the second learner may still make mistakes, but understands faster, reacts quicker, remembers vocabulary more naturally, and speaks with far more confidence, because every important language system was trained daily in balance. And this is the moment many people suddenly realize something powerful. Fluency is not built through one huge breakthrough. Fluency is built through small, repeated daily actions that slowly train the brain to adapt naturally over time. And once you experience that adaptation personally, your entire understanding of English learning changes forever. So now let's turn this into a simple daily system that you can realistically follow without feeling overwhelmed, because one of the biggest mistakes people make when learning English is trying to do too much at once. They create impossible study schedules, burn out after 1 week, and then believe they failed again. But this 60-minute formula works differently because it is designed around consistency and pre-adaptation instead of pressure and perfection. So here is exactly how you can structure your daily routines starting today. First, begin with 20 minutes of listenings, because listening is the foundation that prepares your brain for every other skill. And the important thing is not choosing perfect material. The important thing is choosing content you can return to every day consistently. Maybe a YouTube channel you enjoy, maybe podcasts during your commute, maybe Netflix scenes with subtitles, maybe interviews, conversations, or daily vlogs, because the goal is repeated exposure to real English sounds and patterns. And during these 20 minutes, do not pause every few seconds to translate every unknown word. Focus on understanding the overall message and allowing your brain to become familiar with natural speech. Gradually, then immediately move into 15 minutes of shadowing. Choose short clips from your listening material and repeat exactly what the speaker says out loud. Copy pronunciation, rhythm, emotion, pauses, and speaking speed naturally. And do not worry if you sound imperfect at first, because shadowing is not about perfection. It is about building automatic speaking reflexes through imitation. And one powerful strategy is to repeat the same 30-second clip multiple times until your mouth begins moving more comfortably without hesitation, then spend 10 minutes reviewing vocabulary using active recall through apps like Anki or Quizlet, but instead of memorizing random isolated words, focus on useful real-life phrases like "I'm working on it" or "that makes sense." Because the brain remembers language much more effectively through meaningful chunks connected to real communication, and when reviewing, force yourself to recall meanings and usage actively before revealing the answer, because retrieval strengthens memory far more deeply than passive reading. Then spend 10 minutes speaking out loud every single day, even if nobody is around. Talk about your day. Describe what you are doing. Summarize a podcast. React to a video. Answer imaginary questions, or record voice notes on your phone, because speaking daily trains confidence and reaction speed in ways silent studying never can. And finally, finish with 5 minutes of writing. Keep it simple. Write a few sentences about your day, your goals, or something you learned, because writing helps organize thoughts directly in English, while reinforcing vocabulary and sentence patterns emotionally. And what makes this system powerful is that every section supports the others naturally. Listening improves understanding. Shadowing strengthens pronunciation. Vocabulary review improves retention. Speaking builds communication ability. And writing reinforces internal thinking patterns. And when you repeat this process daily for 3 to 6 months, something incredible begins happening quietly beneath the surface. English starts becoming emotionally familiar instead of mentally exhausting, and that is when real fluency finally begins growing naturally through consistency instead of pressure. Now, I want you to imagine what your next English session could actually feel like if you stopped studying randomly and followed this 60-minute formula step by step in real life, because the goal is not to create another motivational idea that disappears tomorrow. The goal is to build a repeatable daily experience that trains your brain naturally over time. So let's walk through the entire routine together as if you were doing it right now. First, you sit down and begin your 20 minutes of listening. Maybe you open a short YouTube video where someone is talking naturally about habits, daily life, or personal growth. And at first, your brain wants to panic because you do not understand every word, but this time you do something different. Instead of stopping constantly, to translate, you relax and focus on understanding the overall meaning, the emotional tone, the repeated phrases. Because listening is not about perfection. Listening is about familiarizing your brain with real English daily. And after a few minutes, you suddenly recognize expressions you have heard before, like, "to be honest," or "I've been trying to." And that small recognition matters more than you realize, because it proves your brain is adapting through repeated exposure. Then after 20 minutes, you move directly into shadowing. You replay a short sentence from the video like, "The most important thing is consistency," and repeat it out loud, exactly as the speaker says it, again and again, copying rhythm, speed, emotion, and pronunciation. And maybe the first few attempts feel uncomfortable, but slowly your mouth starts moving more naturally. because shadowing trains speaking reflexes directly. Instead of forcing you to build sentences from grammar rules alone, then you spend 10 minutes reviewing vocabulary in Anki or Quizlet, but instead of memorizing isolated textbook words, you focus on useful real-life phrases connected to the content you already heard earlier, like small daily habits or improve over time. And because your brain already heard these phrases in context, they feel more meaningful and easier to remember. Then you begin your 10 minutes of speaking practice. Maybe you answer a simple question out loud like, what habit do I want to improve? And even if your grammar is imperfect, you keep speaking because fluency is built through communication, not silence. And at first, there may be pauses and mistakes. But something important is happening. Your brain is learning to express thoughts in real time without depending completely on translation. And finally, you spend 5 minutes writing a short journal entry in English. Like, today I practiced English for 60 minutes and I felt more confident during shadowing. And although the writing is simple, it strengthens your ability to organize ideas directly in English naturally. And now notice what just happened during this 1 hour session. Listening trained familiarity, shadowing trained pronunciation and reaction speed, vocabulary review strengthened memory, speaking activated communication, and writing reinforced internal thinking patterns. And when this process is repeated daily, your brain slowly transforms in ways that traditional studying rarely creates. Because you are no longer only learning information about English. You are training yourself to experience English actively every single day until understanding and speaking begin feeling increasingly automatic and natural over time. Now, this is the moment where the transformation becomes deeper than language itself, because after following this 60-minute system consistently, something begins changing, not only in your English ability, but in your identity. And for many learners, this is the part nobody ever talks about, because most people spend years seeing themselves as someone trying to learn English instead of someone actually living with English every single day. And that difference matters more than most people realize, because the brain behaves differently when a language feels distant and stressful compared to when it feels familiar and connected to daily life. And this is exactly why random studying often creates frustration, because learners keep treating English like schools like a difficult school subject they occasionally visit, instead of an environment they experience consistently. But when you follow this formula daily, something powerful starts happening beneath the surface. Listening every day makes English sounds feel less threatening and more emotionally familiar. Shadowing trains your voice to move more naturally without overanalyzing every sentence. Vocabulary review stops feeling like painful memorization because phrases return repeatedly in meaningful contexts. Speaking daily weakens the fear that once convinced you to stay silent, and writing helps your thoughts slowly organize themselves directly in English instead of depending completely on translation. And over time, these small daily actions begin changing the way you see yourself completely. Because confidence is not created by motivation alone. Confidence is created by repeated proof. Every day you complete the 60-minute routine, your brain receives evidence that English is becoming part of your real life. Every podcast you understand slightly better. Every phrase you repeat more naturally. Every sentence you speak with less hesitation becomes proof that adaptation is happening. And this is why consistency matters more than intensity, because fluency is not built through occasional emotional bursts of motivation. Fluency is built through repeated exposure until English slowly becomes emotionally normal to your brain. And once English feels normal, your reactions become faster automatically because the language no longer triggers the same fear and pressure it once did. And this is also why perfectionism is one of the biggest hidden enemies of fluency, because perfectionism teaches learners to avoid communication until they feel ready, while real fluency grows through imperfect interaction, repeated consistently over time. And when you finally understand that deeply something changes forever, you stop asking, when will I become fluent? And start asking, how can I stay connected to English every single day? Because the real goal is not to study English occasionally. The real goal is to create a lifestyle where English enters your ears, your mouth, your memory, and your thoughts daily until speaking begins feeling less like performance and more like natural communication. And that identity shift is often the exact moment where long-term fluency truly begins growing naturally and permanently inside the brain. Now, I want to challenge you to do something that may completely change your relationship with English over the next 30 days. And the challenge is simple but powerful. For the next month, stop learning English randomly and commit to this exact 60-minute formula every single day without negotiating with yourself, because most learners never stay consistent long enough for the brain to truly adapt. They study intensely for a few days, disappear for a week, restart again emotionally, and repeat the cycle for years without realizing the real problem is inconsistency. It's not ability. But this challenge is different because it is designed to train your brain daily through balanced exposure instead of pressure. So here are the rules. Every single day, complete the full 60-minute routine, exactly in the same structure. 20 minutes listening, 15 minutes shadowing, 10 minutes vocabulary review, 10 minutes speaking, and 5 minutes writing. And during these 30 days, do not focus on perfection at all. Your only mission is daily repetition and emotional consistency. Because adaptation only happens when the brain experiences English frequently enough to stop treating it like something foreign. And during the first week, you may still feel awkward. Listening may feel fast. Shadowing may sound uncomfortable. Speaking may feel embarrassing. And writing may feel simple. But keep going, because this stage is completely normal. Your brain is adjusting to a new pattern of daily exposure. Then, during the second week, something subtle often begins happening. You start recognizing repeated phrases automatically. During listening, your shadowing becomes smoother. Your vocabulary returns faster from memory, and your speaking pauses become slightly shorter, without you forcing them consciously. And by the third week, many learners experience something powerful emotionally. English starts feeling less mentally exhausting because the brain no longer treats every sentence like a completely new problem to solve. Common structures begin feeling familiar, and confidence slowly grows from repeated evidence instead of temporary motivation. And by the fourth week, you may suddenly notice moments where you understand parts of videos without translating, respond faster to simple questions, or, or express thoughts more naturally than before. And this is the moment many people finally realize something incredible. Fluency is not built through one huge breakthrough. Fluency is built quietly through small daily systems repeated long enough for the brain to adapt automatically. And that is exactly why this challenge matters. Because it teaches you to stop chasing motivation and start building identity through consistency. And at the end of these 30 days, I want you to compare yourself not to perfect native speakers, but to the version of yourself who once felt frozen, overwhelmed, and afraid to speak at all. Because if you stay committed to this system, your listening will improve, your speaking reflexes will become faster, your memory will strengthen, and your emotional relationship with English may completely change, not because you became magically talented overnight, but because your brain finally received the balanced daily training it needed all along to build real fluency naturally over time. So, now the question is no longer whether you can improve your English. The real question is whether you are finally ready to stop waiting for the perfect moment and start building fluency through small daily actions that actually train your brain naturally. Because after everything you heard today, one truth should now be clear: fluency is not something a few lucky people are born with. Fluency is the result of repeated daily exposure, listening, imitation, memory training, speaking, and reflection, practiced consistently over time. And this 60-minute formula works because it removes confusion and gives your brain exactly what it needs every single day. 20 minutes of listening to build familiarity, 15 minutes of shadowing to strengthen pronunciation and speaking reflexes, 10 minutes of vocabulary review to improve memory, 10 minutes of speaking to create confidence through action, and 5 minutes of writing to organize your thoughts directly in English. And if you follow this process consistently for 3 to 6 months, your future self may sound completely different from the person listening right now, because little by little, your brain will stop panicking during conversations. Your listening will become calmer, your vocabulary will appear faster, and speaking English will begin feeling less like a test and more like a natural part of your life. And this is why I do not want you to leave this video excited for only one night and then return to old habits. Tomorrow, I want you to make one simple decision today. Commit to 60 minutes a day and trust the process long enough for adaptation to happen naturally. Because the people who eventually become fluent are not always the smartest or the most talented. They are usually the ones who stayed connected to English consistently, while others kept stopping and restarting emotionally. And before this video ends, I want you to do one powerful thing right now. Say one sentence in English out loud. Any sentence. Maybe I will practice every day. Or my English is improving step by step. Because that sentence is more important than you think. It is proof that you are no longer only dreaming about fluency. You are finally beginning to build it through action starting today. And when you finish this video today, I do not want you to remember only motivation. I want you to remember a completely different way of seeing English forever, because from this moment forward, English is no longer something you study occasionally when you feel inspired. English becomes something you live with every single day through listening, shadowing, vocabulary review, speaking, and writing. And if you continue following this 60-minute formula consistently, something incredible will slowly happen beneath the surface, even before you fully notice it. Your ears will begin recognizing common phrases automatically. Your mouth will react faster during conversations. Your memory will hold vocabulary longer. Without forcing yourself to memorize endlessly, and your fear of speaking will slowly lose its power, because your brain will no longer see English as something unfamiliar or dangerous. It will start feeling normal, familiar, and emotionally connected to your daily life. And this is the hidden reason why consistency matters more than intensity. Because fluency is not built in one emotional night of motivation. Fluency is built quietly through repeated exposure over weeks and months until the brain naturally adapts to the language the same way it adapts to any repeated environment. And one day, you may suddenly realize you understood a video without subtitles, answered a question without translating, or expressed a thought naturally before fear had time to stop you. And that moment will not feel like magic anymore, because now you understand exactly how it happened. It happened because every day your listening trained familiarity, your shadowing trained speaking reflexes, your vocabulary review strengthened memory, your speaking practice built confidence, and your writing organized your thoughts directly in English. And together, these small actions slowly transform the way your brain experiences language itself. And this is why I want you to stop underestimating small daily effort from today forward. Because 1 hour may not feel life-changing in a single day, but repeated for 3 to 6 months, it can completely reshape your confidence, your communication ability, and your future opportunities. And before this video ends, I want you to remember one final truth. You do not need perfect grammar to begin speaking. You do not need perfect pronunciation to begin communicating. And you do not need permission from anyone to start improving your life through English right now. All you need is consistency, strong enough to continue even when progress feels invisible at first. Because invisible progress is still progress, and eventually those small daily sessions become automatic reactions. Those reactions become confidence. And that confidence becomes fluency. So right now, before you leave, say one sentence in English out loud, any sentence at all, because that single sentence may become the first step toward a completely different version of yourself in the future. Spend 20 minutes listening to real English every day, 15 minutes shadowing native speakers, 10 minutes reviewing useful vocabulary with active recall, 10 minutes speaking out loud even with mistakes, and 5 minutes writing simple thoughts in English. Because fluency grows through daily repetition and brain adaptation, not perfection. And if this video helped you feel more motivated and gave you a clearer system for improving your English naturally, you can support the channel by liking and subscribing so I can continue creating practical videos that help real learners build confidence, improve speaking reflexes, and become fluent step by step every single day